Advocate Budlender.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few questions, Dr. Docrat. Just to begin with, Doctor, you were questioned initially this morning very extensively on your qualifications, and your qualifications are certainly impressive.
Thank you.
One of the questions that you were asked by the chairperson was whether you had a degree in IT, information technology. I suspect that may be because there's another expert that I think is coming to give evidence who does have qualifications in IT and not in linguistics. Can you just tell us, do you need a degree in IT in order to interpret emojis?
No, you do not, Chair.
And what makes you particularly qualified to interpret emojis for this tribunal as opposed to someone who has an IT background?
As I established earlier and answered the questions, Chair, it falls directly within my research expertise, based on my qualifications within forensic and legal linguistics, semiotics of law, jury linguistics, and a firm understanding of sociolinguistics.
Okay. But you're not an expert in the area of gender and issues around gender, am I correct?
No, I'm not.
So your interpretation that you provided today, your opinion that you've provided for this panel, is really to be understood solely through the lens of forensic linguistics. Correct?
That is correct.
Okay. I just want to then look at a few of the instances of emojis and the use of emojis that we've heard about today and just clarify a couple of things. So we've talked extensively about the use of laughing emojis, or what you call hysterically laughing, rolling on the floor laughing emojis. I think we all understand which one that means. And you have often described the use of emojis by both parties here, but particularly by the complainant, as being playful. You recall that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I want to just think, in the context of a series of, in fact, let me start with the last. I just want to clarify that just before you finished your evidence for Advocate Skeepers, you talked about an emoji with the tongue sticking out as being playful. But just to clarify, that is still context dependent. You're not suggesting that it's always playful.
No, that is context specific.
Okay, that's fine. If we then turn to the sequence of laughing emojis, so a sequence of the hysterical laughing emojis that you described as part of the complainant's linguistic footprint, I think.
Fingerprint.
Fingerprint, sorry. And you said that this was something that she used repetitively, she used often. Would I be correct to understand your evidence that sometimes seemingly harmless emojis can be used to try and underplay the seriousness of what a person is actually saying in a message, and that nonetheless the message remains serious? Would that be a fair summary?
In certain instances, yes, where I testified that and I explained that she was laughing it off.
Mm. And what do you mean by laughing it off?
She was trying to change the tone of the conversation, change it into another direction.
So it wasn't that she was agreeing, it was that would it be fair to say that sometimes that sequence of emojis could denote discomfort on the part of the complainant from your reading of the WhatsApp?
There was no thumbs up. Thumbs up, and where she used the winking face emoji, that's where you would see agreement.
Okay. Yeah. So there was an article that you mentioned that you co-published with another professor that was made available to us by the evidence leader. And in that article, you refer to a series of cases. You were asked just now about some of them. One of them that was interesting to me was involved the use of an aeroplane emoji. And I think that was a New Zealand case.
That is correct.
Can you tell the panel about how the use of the aeroplane was relevant in that case?
In that context, Chair, in that specific case, there was an abusive relationship between the sender of the aeroplane and the recipient. The recipient, who was the complainant in that case, she had a protection order in place against the sender. She had to flee to another country, Chair, and he found out about it and he sent a couple of text messages, one which had a vulgar language, which I'm not going to repeat, that said, "You are going to effing get it." And that was followed by the aeroplane emoji. And in that instance, the court interpreted to say that it was a threat against her because he threatened to say, within the context of the nature of their relationship, that he was going to fly to her and attack her. That's how the aeroplane emoji was understood in that context. So, Chair, in that instance, the aeroplane emoji was used for non-standard use and understood.
Yes, and so the aeroplane emoji on its own may not have appeared immediately threatening, but used in context, the court found that it was threatening.
Definitely, because the context was specific and also the intention of the sender.
Now, you talk about standardization and standardized use of emojis. Your article, if I'm reading it correctly, suggests that there's no standardization, that one must really be looking at context and the relationship between the sender and the recipient. Now, Dr. Mello, who's an expert that is coming to give evidence for the respondent, in his summary of his evidence, he says there is standardization in emojis, that Unicode, of which he's a member, sets out what each emoji means, and that these WhatsApps in question here show standardization. And so the suggestion would be that one doesn't need to look further than what the standardized emoji means. Do you have a response to that?
Yes, Chair. In the context of Unicode, as I explained earlier when I was giving evidence, Unicode creates a code that is written for each emoji. So each emoji has a specific code, and that is then released across platforms, and that's why we see it represented slightly differently across devices and platforms. That's what I explained. The second thing is that there is no standard understanding of emojis. And we see this here specifically today within the context of what I've explained, Chair, where sometimes, for instance, when we look at the banana, we know that we understand it within the context, if we have a shopping list that we're sending, that it's a fruit. The same would apply to the eggplant as a vegetable. The same would apply to the peach. It has a use in terms of that instance. Now, within this specific context, it's not being used for the purposes of going into the supermarket and purchasing fruit and vegetables. So immediately, this is why I've emphasized that context is key. You have to be able to interpret and understand the meaning of the emojis with applying the various functions and the analytical tools from a point of expertise to say, this is the context, this is how the emoji is interpreted within this specific context.
And can emojis used repetitively in the absence of a response? So assume the sender asks a question of the recipient, doesn't get a response, as we've seen in the WhatsApps, and then sends repeated emojis like the hearing aid emoji. Is it possible that the use of repeated emojis where there's no response can be seen as, if we were using language or if we're in person, as badgering for an answer?
Well, you're persistently asking, Chair. You're asking that question with the use of the emoji, specifically the hearing aid emoji, because that depicts like I'm waiting for an answer, I'm all ears. So there is a persistence in certain instances, but again, it's context specific, as I explained.
Okay, thank you.
So if I may just ask this, you are not saying there's a total absence of standardization. You are not saying that.
No, not with every emoji.
Because if there was total absence of standardization, we will never be able to communicate.
Definitely,
We'll
Chair.
go different directions.
That's correct, Chair.
Thank you.
So to understand it correctly, you have standard meanings, as you've explained today, for each emoji, but then you apply a contextual
With certain
interpretation.
emojis. That's what
With
we've gone
certain-
through today, yes.
Well, maybe just explain that to us again. So you have standard understandings for certain emojis, not all emojis. Is that correct?
So that's why I said the specific one and the easiest one would be the banana,
Okay.
would be the eggplant. Because our specific standard understanding is that it's a fruit, it's a vegetable, but not within this context. So that is your standard function and understanding of that emoji. But then when used within this specific context, the meaning and the interpretation changes, Chair.
And is that where your training in linguistics comes in being relevant to interpreting emojis, rather than simply looking at a Unicode definition of what emojis mean?
From a point of forensic and legal linguistics, yes. But you have to understand the semiotics of law, because the semiotics, Chair, deals with the understanding of the symbols.
Can you tell, what does that mean? What is
So your
semiotics?
emojis, for instance, that's
Okay.
a clear, easy example to say that the semiotics of law is directly relevant to understanding the emojis.
And you've studied that.
I have.
Now, this is a very new field in South Africa. It sounds like it's a new field around the world.
It is. Not around the world, but within the South African context. If you trace the history of forensic linguistics and legal linguistics in particular, you'll look back to about 2015, 2017. So before this, Chair, most of the literature on language and legal processes and analyzing language within text and so forth happened sort of from a language and law perspective. That's what under the banner that was being used. And a lot of the focus was just on legal interpretation within courtrooms and our standard translation issues within courtroom discourse. So then from 2017 onwards, there was a major shift where myself and 2 other colleagues immersed ourselves as part of this international association, of which I'm a member, and I'm currently hosting that conference now based on expertise. And as the time progressed, and with my research and my thesis, my MA, I explained earlier, my PhD, everything was located within the discipline of forensic linguistics. So this is why, if you look at the literature within the South African perspective, you'll see a major push from us from 2017 onwards, where I've been driving the discipline and growing it within South Africa and the African continent more broadly. The semiotics of law is very new as well in South Africa. That only happened a little bit later. So from 2020, you'll see me writing about semiotics of law, because it takes quite a while to familiarize yourself with the international literature, to immerse yourself within the field, publish, and so forth. So that would only happen from 2020 onwards, as with the jury linguistics discipline as well.
So how big is the community of people in South Africa that would call themselves, rightly call themselves, in your view, experts in forensic linguistics?
There are 10 colleagues, including myself, working in the discipline of forensic linguistics. There are 2 colleagues working in the discipline of forensic and legal linguistics. That would be my co-author on that article, Professor Russell Kishila. And then there is only 1 person, and that's me, working within all 4 disciplines within South Africa.
And are you aware of Dr. Mello as one of the experts
No.
in this field?
No, Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much for your assistance,
Thank you.
Dr. Dr. Thank you, Chair.